The Love That Transcended Time, a journey of growth and healing. Before all this, before I even knew what it meant to really lose something that never belonged to you in the first place, there was just the routine. Same coffee shop, same playlists, same glances at people passing by without really seeing them. I thought I had everything in order. Degree, job, friends I could laugh with, parents I could call on Sundays. Love, though, was something I had grown used to shelving. It wasn't that I didn't believe in it, but more like I didn't trust it anymore. Like a door that creaks open to a room you once lived in but no longer recognize. Then she arrived. Not with thunder or fireworks, no dramatic collision of fate, just a pair of tired eyes and a broken umbrella. And from that moment, nothing was the same again. It started at a bus stop on a Thursday evening. It had been raining all day, that misty kind of rain that doesn't make noise, but seeps into your clothes, your bones, your thoughts. I had missed my earlier bus, something that rarely happened, and I was annoyed at the delay. She stood 3 feet to my left, struggling with her umbrella like it was the last fight she had energy for. The metal ribs were bent inward, the fabric sagging like a failed parachute. Most people would have looked away, pretended not to notice. I handed her my umbrella instead. That was it. I didn't say anything, didn't ask for it back, just offered a small nod before stepping into the drizzle myself. She said nothing either, only returned the nod, but her eyes lingered like she was memorizing something about me for later. And maybe she was. 3 days later, I found my umbrella folded neatly and hanging from the handle of my apartment door. No note, just a gesture. But that's when everything subtle began turning significant. The kind of significant that starts wrapping around your ordinary days and making them feel different. I didn't see her again for 2 weeks. It drove me quietly mad. I went back to that same bus stop every day after work, hoping she might appear again like some recurring dream. I didn't know her name, didn't even know if she lived in the neighborhood. But the image of her, rain-kissed, slightly trembling, with that mix of resignation and fire in her eyes, was etched too sharply into my memory to forget. Then one evening, she was there again. Same place, same time, but this time with an umbrella that worked. She looked at me with surprise, or maybe it was something softer, warmer. "You," she said, and it wasn't a question. We talked then. Not about anything important. Mostly surface-level things. The weather, how annoying the bus schedule was, her job as a freelance illustrator, my job in digital marketing. But it was the kind of conversation where silence didn't feel awkward, where you don't feel the need to impress or filter yourself. Her name was Mira, and that name began to echo in my head even when she wasn't around. There wasn't a declaration or a decision. It was more like driftwood that slowly, inevitably, found the same current. We began meeting without saying it was planned. She started showing up at the coffee shop I always went to on Saturday mornings, and I stopped being surprised when she was already there. I learned that she didn't believe in soulmates, but she did believe in moments. You can love someone deeply in a single moment, she once said, and that can matter more than a lifetime of comfort. I should have taken it as a warning, but instead, I clung to every word like it was prophecy. Weeks turned into months. Mira wasn't like anyone I had known. She was chaotic in a way that made you want to protect her, but never pitiful. She had scars she didn't talk about, and laughter that broke through them like light under a locked door. She would disappear for days sometimes, no message, no warning, and come back with stories about abandoned libraries, coastal towns, or nothing at all. I didn't press her. Something told me not to. And in return, she gave me herself in bursts, full of life, intensity, and something like fear. We never said, "I love you." I think we were both too afraid of what that might mean. But the love was there, unspoken, wrapped in gestures and half smiles, and the way she would look at me when she thought I wasn't watching. There were moments I'd catch her watching me like she was memorizing again, as if some part of her already knew we were temporary. I didn't ask questions I didn't want painful answers to. But I noticed the late night phone calls she would take in the hallway, the way she sometimes flinched when I touched the small of her back, the locked drawer in her apartment she once slammed shut when I walked in unannounced. I told myself everyone has secrets. That didn't mean she loved me any less. That didn't mean I should be afraid, but I was. One night, I found a sketchbook left open on her kitchen table. She had drawn me, not once, but over and over, in charcoal, in ink, in trembling pencil lines, pages filled with my face, my hands, my silhouette asleep. It should have comforted me. But something in the desperation of those lines made my chest tighten, like she was drawing to remember me, not just to capture me. I closed the book and left it where I found it. The next morning, she was gone again. This time, she didn't come back after 3 days, or a week, or 2. Her number rang but never connected. Her social media was wiped clean. I went to her apartment, and someone else answered the door. No forwarding address. No sign she had ever lived there. Just a silence so vast it threatened to crush me. I grieved her like someone who had died, but worse, because I didn't know if she had. There was no closure, no ending, just a vanishing. And so I kept living. Barely. I went back to the routine. Same coffee shop. Same playlists. But every time it rained, I half expected her to appear. When the umbrella I had given her finally broke, I kept it anyway, just in case. And then almost a year later, she walked into my life again. Same tired eyes. Same soft nod. But this time there was a man walking beside her, holding her hand like it belonged there. She saw me, paused. The world didn't. People rushed around us like usual, but time froze between our eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She only mouthed one word I'll never forget. Sorry. That was all. And then she turned away. I stood there rooted to the ground, unable to move. My heart didn't break then. It had broken long before. That moment was just the echo. And still, somehow, I loved her. Even in her absence. Even in her silence. Even now. The days after seeing her again were like walking barefoot across shattered glass, pretending it didn't hurt. I told no one. Not because it was some grand secret, but because saying it aloud might have made it too real. That she had come back into my life just long enough to finish whatever chapter had been left dangling without a proper end. That she'd looked into my eyes and said sorry, and it had felt more like a final goodbye than anything we'd ever actually said when we were together. I couldn't stop replaying it. That single word. The calm in her expression. The man beside her whose name I didn't know, who had no idea how long I had waited in that spot without ever realizing I was waiting at all. And the truth that settled heavier than everything else is she had moved on. I tried telling myself it didn't mean what I thought it did. That maybe he was a friend, a cousin, someone temporary. But my gut wasn't stupid. It recognized finality even when the heart begged for a loophole. After that, the city turned cold in a different way. Not seasonally, but inside me. Everything familiar lost its edge. Coffee tasted bland. The walk to work felt longer. Music that once comforted me now only scraped old wounds open. I tried dating. For a while. There was Zoe, who laughed at my sarcasm and sent goodnight messages without fail. And Lana, who worked in film and loved rainy days as much as I used to. But they weren't Mira. They didn't have her sudden storms of silence, her restless wanderings, the way she'd squeeze my hand 3 times in a row like a secret language. I missed her unpredictability more than I liked anyone else's stability. It wasn't fair to them, and eventually, they realized I wasn't present in the ways they needed. I let them go without a fight. I went back to the places she and I had loved. Our bookstore near the canal, where she once read me poetry in whispers, the rooftop she broke into because the view reminded her of a forgotten dream, even that grimy old laundromat where we'd sat for hours because her apartment's machine had exploded mid-cycle. The ghosts of us lingered everywhere, laughing, crying, tangled in memories I couldn't share with anyone else. And sometimes I hated her for that. For disappearing, for reappearing, for moving on while leaving me behind with this half-written love story I couldn't burn or finish. Months passed. I began to sleep again, though restlessly. My job became something I buried myself in. Late hours, extra projects, anything to avoid the slow ache of missing someone who no longer belonged to your world. Friends drifted. Family worried. I told them I was just tired, which wasn't a lie, just not the whole truth. Then, late one night, as I scrolled mindlessly through emails, something strange happened. A message popped up in my inbox, subject line blank, no name, just a single attachment. A photo. It was of me, sleeping, shirtless, the bedsheets half pulled over my torso. The angle was familiar. I remembered that moment. Mira had taken it. She'd told me she wanted to remember the way I looked at peace. I stared at the photo until the screen blurred with tears. Beneath it, no message, no explanation, only a timestamp from 2 years ago and a sender address made of scrambled letters. I replied anyway. What now? No answer. But that was Mira's way, wasn't it? To pull the thread and vanish. Still, that photo did something to me. It cracked open a piece I'd tried to board up. It wasn't about hope. It was about unresolved truth. And I realized then, I didn't really know who she was. I knew her laugh, her habits, the way her eyes closed just a second longer when she was trying not to cry. But I didn't know her history. Not fully. Not why she disappeared, or who the man beside her was. I had accepted too much, been content with fragments, maybe because part of me feared that the full truth would undo the magic. But now, I needed to know. Not to win her back. That wasn't even the goal anymore. I needed to reclaim myself from the illusion. So I started digging. Not obsessively, not all at once. Just quietly, in small doses. I remembered her telling me once about an art collective she used to sketch for in her early days. I found them through some old Instagram tags and reached out under the pretense of looking for a missing artist. A woman named Kala responded. She remembered Mira. Said she was talented, withdrawn, brilliant but unreliable. Said she used to talk about someone named Dario a lot. Someone she was running from or toward, depending on the day. That name haunted me. Dario, a name she had never once spoken to me. I asked Kala more, but she shut down. "You're not the first to come looking for her," she wrote. "But if you care about your peace, let her go." That only made the fire burn hotter. I searched through old forums where Mira once posted her art anonymously. I found sketches that mirrored the ones in her apartment. A pattern emerged. Each piece had a signature, an abstract heart torn in two. She'd drawn the same heart over and over. Then I found one with a caption. "Some people you don't meet, you remember them forward." I didn't know what that meant, but it rattled something inside me. One day, I got a message from an unknown number. No name, just a location, a small coastal town. One she'd once mentioned in passing, saying it had the best peach pie she'd ever tasted. I told myself it was coincidence. That maybe my searches had triggered something, maybe I was being toyed with. But I went. I had to. I packed light and left on a Friday evening. The train ride was quiet, the kind that hums so steadily it puts you into that half-dream state. I watched the trees blur by and wondered what I was expecting. That she'd be there, that we'd talk, that she'd explain. The town was sleepy, almost forgotten by time. I walked along the shoreline where boats swayed lazily, and the air smelled of salt and sunburnt wood. I asked around. No one knew Mira, or said they didn't. I found the cafe she'd mentioned once, the one with the pie. Ordered a slice. It tasted like regret and nostalgia. As I left the cafe, I passed a mural on the side of an old building. Bright colors, swirling figures. And in the corner, the torn heart signature. My breath caught. She had been here. Maybe still was. I followed that mural like it was a trail of breadcrumbs. Another painting was inside a library. This one of two hands almost touching, one vanishing into mist. Then another at the edge of the town's market on a utility box. Two figures walking away from each other under a shared umbrella. She was telling a story, our story. And suddenly I knew. This wasn't coincidence. She had led me here. Not to find her, but to understand. That love for her was never linear. It was scattered, hidden, buried beneath symbols and gestures. and I had been part of something bigger in her mind than I had realized. Still, no sign of her. Until that night. The ocean had gone black under the stars, and I wandered back toward the pier where fishermen packed up their gear. That's when I saw the boat. Small, unremarkable, but painted along its side, in soft white cursive, moments or lifetimes. I approached, heart hammering, and found an old man tightening ropes. I asked about the boat. He smiled, said a woman had painted it months ago and paid him to leave it untouched. Said she came and sat on it every morning for weeks. Then one day, stopped coming. Left him a note. I asked to see it. He handed me a crumpled piece of paper, weather-stained but still legible. It said only this: he'll come one day. And when he does, tell him it wasn't about leaving. It was about loving him enough not to stay. I didn't cry. Not immediately. I just stood there, holding that piece of her like a final puzzle piece that made everything fit and fall apart at once. She hadn't run because she stopped loving me. She'd left because she believed she wasn't capable of staying. That maybe her love, deep as it was, came with too many ghosts. That her chaos would drown the calm I craved. She had chosen absence as a form of mercy, and maybe in her own way that was love too. I stayed in that town 3 days. Didn't search for her again. Just sat on that boat, watched the waves, read the note over and over until it stopped breaking me. When I finally left, I didn't look back. I took the note, not as a souvenir, but as a reminder that some stories don't need a reunion to be real. That sometimes the deepest kind of love is the one that lets go. When I returned home, nothing had physically changed, yet everything felt rearranged. The apartment looked the same, the streets buzzed with the same rhythm. My office still smelled like burnt coffee and old printer paper. But something inside me had shifted. I carried no photographs of her, no belongings she'd left behind, no voice recordings, no gifts, and yet her absence clung to me like smoke. The note from the boat, crumpled, water-stained, nearly unreadable, sat folded in my wallet, close to my heart like a quiet heartbeat. I didn't look at it often. I didn't need to. The words had already tattooed themselves somewhere deeper than skin. In the weeks that followed, I finally stopped searching. Not just for her, but for meaning in places she had touched. I walked different routes, changed coffee shops, rearranged the furniture in my apartment, unfollowed accounts that reminded me of her. It wasn't out of bitterness. It was the quiet kind of release you offer a memory when it's time to let it rest. But healing, I discovered, is not always linear. There were days I felt light, as if a weight had been lifted by understanding her truth. And then there were nights that crushed me, where I'd wake up at 2:47 a.m., convinced I had heard her voice in my sleep, that if I turned over, she'd be lying beside me, breathing quietly with her arm across my chest. I'd reach out, only to feel the cold sheets and the vast, echoing silence. I focused on work, diving headfirst into campaigns, analytics, deadlines. My team noticed the change. Not in a good way. I became efficient but mechanical, like a machine that had forgotten it once knew how to feel. One of my coworkers, Jamie, started checking in more often, lingering at my desk, offering invitations to after-hours drinks or weekend hikes. I accepted one evening out of politeness. We ended up sharing 3 beers on the rooftop of her apartment, watching the city stretch like an endless circuit board. She asked me, with unusual gentleness, who was she? I didn't pretend not to understand. I just exhaled slowly and said, someone who left without leaving me. Jamie didn't pry. She just offered me another beer and leaned her shoulder against mine for a while. That night, I didn't dream of Mira. That felt like a small step forward. Over time, something unexpected began to take root, not the return of old love, but the stirrings of a new kind of peace. Not happiness, not yet, but a strange and welcome stillness. It was like sitting at the bottom of the ocean where everything is muffled and still, but you finally learn how to breathe. I started drawing again. Not well, not like Mira, but enough to reconnect with something I hadn't touched since high school. I sketched rooftops, alleys, the cafe from the town she loved, not to summon her, but to make peace with the beauty of what had been. The page became a place of acceptance. Months passed. Seasons turned. And then something happened that I could never have prepared for. I received a letter, not an email, not a text. A real hand-written letter, the kind people stopped sending a decade ago. It had no return address, but the handwriting struck me like a drumbeat. Sharp and slanted, unmistakably hers. My name was written across the front in lowercase letters, just as she always wrote it. Inside, only one sentence. What would you do if the story isn't over? No signature. No date. I sat with the letter in my lap for hours, staring at it like it might disappear if I blinked. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it wasn't her. Maybe someone was playing a cruel joke. But my gut said otherwise. Mira had always known how to create space and tension with only a few words. This was her, undeniably. I didn't know how to respond. Was it a test? A doorway? A game? After everything, after finding closure in her absence, was I willing to reopen the door and walk through again? I waited 3 days. I told no one. Then I wrote a reply. 1 line only. I'd need to know if the story is real. I mailed it to the same post office in the coastal town, hoping she'd left instructions to intercept anything addressed to her there. Or maybe she'd been watching, waiting, somehow knowing I would come back into the current if she threw a line. Weeks passed with no reply. And then, as I walked out of my apartment one evening to get groceries, I saw her, not across a street. Not in a dream. She was sitting on the steps of my building like a quiet thought waiting to be spoken. No luggage, just a weathered notebook in her hands and a scarf I had once teased her for wearing in the summer. She looked up, and I felt my heart stutter in a way it hadn't for almost a year. Neither of us said anything. She stood slowly, cautious, as if expecting me to turn around. I didn't. I took a step forward, then another. Her lips trembled, not with tears, but with something like restraint. "You came back," I finally said. She nodded. "I didn't know if I could," she whispered. Her voice, just as I remembered, with a crack like an old vinyl record, stirred everything I thought I had buried. We walked without talking, side by side, until we reached the park where the trees curved like gentle guardians. We sat on a bench, and the silence between us wasn't awkward. It was holy. Finally, she spoke. "I left because I thought I was poison." She looked away. "Every relationship I've had before you ended in collapse. Dramatic, messy. I didn't want that for us. You were the first person who made me feel still. And that scared me more than chaos ever did." I didn't interrupt. She continued. "I thought leaving you would protect us. I thought love was something I needed to destroy before it destroyed me." I looked at her, and for the first time, I didn't feel pain in my chest. Only clarity. "But love isn't a weapon," I said. "It's a mirror. You were scared of what you saw." She nodded, a tear sliding down her cheek. "And what I saw in you was a version of me I didn't think I deserved." She handed me the notebook. "This is everything I couldn't say." I flipped through it, pages of sketches, writings, memories she had drawn from our time together. Places we'd gone, looks we'd shared. Even the boat, the mural, the note she'd left with the old man. She had documented everything, not as a way to let go, but to remember while she figured herself out. "I wanted to come back sooner," she said. "But I needed to be sure I wasn't returning just because I missed you. I needed to return because I was ready to be with you." And then came the question that changed everything. Would you let me try again? It should have been easy. The part of me that still longed for her, the one that never stopped tracing her name in my mind, screamed yes. But another part hesitated, not out of vengeance, but out of self-preservation. "If you leave again," I said, "I won't wait this time." She didn't flinch. "Then I won't leave," she said. "Not unless you ask me to." We didn't fall back into old patterns. We started over, carefully, deliberately. She got her own place. We met on Sundays at the pier, walked new streets, built new memories. We didn't pretend nothing had happened. We honored the break, the ache, the loss, because pretending would have been worse than acknowledging our cracks. she started therapy. I joined her sometimes. We unpacked everything. Our fears, her ghosts, my resentment, our expectations. We had arguments. Honest ones, vulnerable ones. But now we knew how to stay. Months later, as the first snow began to fall, she took my hand while we walked the path near the river. "I never told you about Dario," she said quietly. The name still pierced like a shard of glass, but I nodded. "He was the first person I loved," she continued. "But he was also the person who taught me how love could turn violent. He made me believe that my instincts were always wrong, that my feelings were traps. I carried that into us, and I hated myself for it." I squeezed her hand. "You're not the person he made you believe you were." She looked at me, finally, open, unafraid. "No, but I had to leave to figure that out, and I'm sorry it cost you so much silence." I didn't say anything, just pulled her closer, letting the snow settle on us like a benediction. In the end, we didn't promise forever. We promised now, every day, with choice, not assumption, with honesty, not illusion. And in a world so often fractured by goodbye, that felt like the greatest miracle of all. The strangest thing about rebuilding something that once felt ruined is how both familiarity and forwardness coexist in every gesture. The way her hand fit in mine hadn't changed, nor had the soft curve of her laugh when I said something only mildly funny. But there was a new caution in both of us, like explorers returning to a place they once mapped but never truly understood. Our love, once impulsive and scattered like brushstrokes on a reckless canvas, was now slower, steadier, more deliberate. It wasn't fire anymore. It was the slow burn of coals under quiet breath, and it was beautiful in a way I hadn't imagined possible. Mira moved into a new apartment, a few blocks from mine. She chose it herself, carefully, intentionally. She didn't ask for help painting the walls or choosing furniture, and when I offered, she smiled and said, "I need to make this space mine before I can let you fully inside it." That sentence stayed with me for days. She wasn't building distance. She was anchoring herself. And in that quiet self-work, I saw a version of her I had never known, one that didn't run, one that wasn't afraid of stillness. I began noticing small changes. She started journaling, something she said she hadn't done since her teenage years. Her sleep became less fragmented. The night terrors stopped. She let me hold her without stiffening first. There was softness returning to her, not the softness of weakness, but the softness of someone shedding armor they no longer needed. I didn't tell her, but watching her heal felt like witnessing spring arrive after a brutal winter. Slow, hesitant, but inevitable. Our Sunday meetings by the pier became ritual. Sometimes we spoke for hours. Other times we just watched the water in silence, passing a thermos back and forth, sharing sips like confessions. She began bringing a sketch pad again. I never looked unless she offered. One afternoon, she handed it to me without a word. On the page was a sketch of us. Not in a romantic pose, not even touching. We were sitting on the bench at the pier, side by side, gazing at nothing in particular. What struck me was the space between us. It wasn't distance, it was respect. A sacred kind of space where two people could breathe without being swallowed. "That's what we are now," she said. Not tangled, just aligned. And my own transformation was more subtle. I had always been the one who clung tightly, who measured worth in presence and constancy. I believed in togetherness, sometimes to the point of fear. But now, with Mira, I began understanding that love didn't always require proximity. That letting someone stand on their own didn't mean they were slipping away. I gave her space without anxiety. She gave me presence without pressure. And somewhere in that quiet balance, I found peace I hadn't known I needed. We didn't tell many people we were together. Again, it wasn't secrecy. It was privacy, a choice to grow this version of us away from the scrutiny of others. My friends noticed my lightness, though. Jamie, especially. She smiled more when we talked, asked fewer probing questions, and once said, "You seem like you finally exhaled." I didn't explain. She didn't ask. Some things don't require narration. Mira started hosting small gatherings at her apartment. Nothing wild, just wine, candles, music, and people who made her feel safe. Artists, poets, the quiet kind of rebels. I attended a few. I watched her move through her space like she belonged to it, not like she was renting her place in the world temporarily. I saw how people gravitated toward her, how they listened when she spoke, as if her words carried more weight simply because she knew when to be silent. At one gathering, she read a poem she had written. It wasn't about me, or maybe it was. It was about a boat that never docked, about a harbor that didn't beg the waves to stay, about love as something unpossessive. I remember thinking then, maybe we had never been broken, just unfinished. One evening, as we walked back from the bookstore hand in hand, she stopped in front of a flower stand and stared at a cluster of violets. "Do you know what violets mean?" she asked. I shook my head. "Loyalty," she said. "Not in the sense of staying, but in the sense of returning." She bought one, pressed it between pages of a journal I knew I'd never be allowed to read. And I loved her for that. But life, of course, doesn't pause when love finds rhythm. We were steady now, but the world wasn't. One day, Mira received a call that fractured her all over again. I saw it in her face before she said a word. Her sister, Lina, had been hospitalized. An overdose. Mira hadn't spoken to her in over 3 years. I had only heard about Lina in fragmented mentions, always wrapped in tension and guilt. She was the mirror I feared, Mira had said once. The proof that our family didn't teach us how to survive, only how to vanish. She flew out the next morning. I offered to come, but she declined. "This is something I need to face alone," she said, and I respected that. But her absence this time felt different. Not like a disappearance, more like a necessary pilgrimage. The days she was gone stretched painfully slow. I tried to distract myself, work errands, even repainting my kitchen cabinets. But each day ended the same way, sitting by the phone, waiting. When she finally called, her voice was cracked and tired, but honest. "She's stable," she said. "But I don't know who she is anymore." I listened as she unpacked years of silence, betrayal, anger, how Lina had blamed her for leaving, how she had blamed herself too. "But I see it now," Mira said. "We were both drowning and neither of us knew how to swim. We just kept pulling each other under." When she returned, she didn't come home immediately. She stayed at her apartment for days, grieving not just for Lina, but for the parts of herself that had been shaped by that broken bond. I left soup on her doorstep, flowers, a handwritten note, "No need to speak. Just knock when you're ready." 4 days later, she knocked. She fell into my arms like a tree finally giving in to gravity. No words, just breathing. We lay on my couch for hours, wrapped in blankets, saying nothing. Later, she whispered, "I thought I would always have to be strong to be loved. But you've loved me through my weakest." I held her tighter. "I don't love you because you're strong," I said. "I love you because you let me see when you're not." After that, our bond deepened. Not in loud ways, but in the subtlety of shared life. Grocery shopping became a ritual of its own. Choosing herbs together, arguing over yogurt flavors, bumping into strangers and pretending to be annoyed. She adopted a cat, named it Clementine. The cat hated everyone but Mira, and I respected that boundary. On weekends, we sometimes stayed in, building forts like children, watching documentaries and pausing them every 5 minutes to debate historical accuracy. Once, during a thunderstorm, the power went out and we lit candles. Mira played old records, and we slow danced in the dark. She whispered, "This is what home feels like." And I realized in that moment I hadn't felt lost in a long time. Still, I knew there was something she hadn't told me. A tension, small but persistent, that crept into her voice when she talked about the future. I didn't push. I waited. Until one night, over dinner, she said, "I've been offered a fellowship in Barcelona for a year." My fork froze mid-air. She looked at me with those same eyes from years ago, the ones that memorized instead of begged. "It's everything I've worked for. A chance to study memory through art. Trauma, recovery, All of it. She paused. But it means leaving. I wanted to scream, to tell her not again, not after everything. But I didn't. Instead, I asked the hardest question I've ever uttered. Do you want me to come with you? She shook her head. No, not because I don't love you, but because this part of my journey needs solitude. I nodded slowly. Will you come back? She reached across the table and took my hand. I don't know, but all right, I'll send pieces of the world back to you. I tried to smile. Then I'll wait, but not in silence this time. She leaned forward. No, we'll build the in-between. That night, we made love like it was both a beginning and an ending. We held each other like a promise, not a possession. And when morning came, there were no goodbyes. Only a soft, "See you later," whispered against my collarbone. The day she left, I didn't go to the airport. We agreed on that. Instead, I walked to the pier, sat on our bench, and waited for the wind to bring me a sign. I opened the thermos she had left me and found a note inside. Love doesn't always travel beside you, but sometimes it sends postcards from every place it lands. And just like that, she was gone again. But this time, the story didn't feel paused. It felt alive, unfolding in letters, in art, in the unseen threads that tether hearts across oceans. And I, for the first time in my life, wasn't afraid of what came next. The first letter arrived 2 weeks after she left. Postmarked from Spain, stamped with the kind of ink that smudges when touched by ocean air, the envelope had no return address, only my name, written in her unmistakable lowercase scrawl, floating in the center like a whisper. Inside was a single sheet of textured paper. She had drawn a city skyline in graphite, all shadow and grace, and beneath it were just 5 words. I saw us in everything. Nothing more. And yet I held that paper like scripture, read it until the edges curled from handling. She was gone, yes, but not vanished. She was writing, she was remembering, she was, in her own way, still here. Over the next month, the letters came irregularly. Some short and cryptic, others longer, filled with descriptions of alleyways and old churches, of museums where she stood for hours studying the faces of oil-painted strangers. She never asked how I was. She didn't offer updates in a conventional sense. Instead, she sent observations. There's a bakery here that smells like the mornings we never got to have. Or, I found a bookstore with a crooked door and a ceiling like the one I imagined above us when you told me your first lie, the small one, about not missing me before you did. Every line was a thread, pulling me closer not to her body, but her mind. I responded the only way I knew how. I wrote back, not letters. I didn't know where to send them. But I began journaling again, pages filled with unsent messages. Every morning before work, I poured coffee and wrote to her as if she were sitting across the table, legs tucked beneath her, hands wrapped around a chipped mug. I told her about the first rain without her, about how Clementine had begun sleeping on my chest instead of avoiding me. I wrote about the time I saw a woman with her walk, and my knees buckled before my mind caught up. I wrote everything, because I didn't know what else to do with the H. The H wasn't loud anymore. Not like before. It was quieter now, woven into the fabric of my days. I'd be folding laundry and suddenly pause, remembering the way she once wore my shirts until they didn't smell like me anymore. I'd be grocery shopping and find myself standing too long in the olive oil aisle, thinking about the time she tried to cook for me and set off the smoke alarm with nothing but a grilled cheese. The memories didn't hurt, they hummed. Around that time, Jamie invited me to a gallery opening. "You need to get out," she said. "There's a whole world that isn't waiting for her." I nodded. She wasn't wrong, but I still went for the wrong reasons. Hoping for distraction, for something loud and shiny to drown the echo of Mira's voice in my head. The gallery was bright and angular, full of people pretending to understand art while holding plastic cups of cheap wine. I wandered past installations that tried too hard and others that didn't try at all. And then I saw it, A canvas, large and lonely on a back wall, drenched in moody blues and ash gray, interrupted only by a tiny splash of violet in the corner. It was unmistakably her style. The curves, the tension, the signature at the bottom, an abstract heart pulled in two. My breath caught. I asked the curator who the artist was. "Mira Allen," he said. "One of our international residents this year. Her stuff's been pulling a lot of attention." It hit me then. Not just that she was becoming known, but that she was letting herself be seen. Publicly. Fully. She was no longer hiding behind street murals or unsigned sketches. She had stepped into the light, and for the first time, I wasn't there to witness the moment she stopped apologizing for her brilliance. I didn't stay long after that. I went home, poured a glass of wine, and sat on the floor with the lights off. Clementine curled into my lap. I whispered into the silence, "She's becoming who she was meant to be." And something about saying it aloud made me cry. Not from sorrow, but from a pride so fierce it felt like love growing new roots. Weeks passed. Winter settled into the city with its usual gray breath. I found rhythm again. I started mentoring at a local community center, helping teenagers build portfolios for art school applications. It felt meaningful, grounding. One of the students, a quiet boy named Ezra, painted in watercolors like he was afraid to be too bold. One afternoon, I gave him one of Mira's postcards, one of the earlier ones, abstract and chaotic. "This," I said, "is what happens when you stop painting for approval." He nodded but didn't reply. The next week, he turned in a piece that was messy, loud, and stunning. I smiled all the way home. Then came her longest silence. No letters, no sketches, no anything. 2 months passed, then 3. I began to worry, not in the obsessive way of before, but with quiet, knowing dread. I checked the gallery's website. Her name was no longer listed. I searched social media, but she remained as invisible as ever online. I told myself she was simply immersed in her work, that she had warned me this part of her journey would require solitude. But fear doesn't care about logic. One morning, I found a package outside my door. A wooden box, unmarked, no return address. Inside was a sketchbook, thick and leather bound. Every page was full. Images of cities, strangers, rooftops, birds in flight, hands that looked like mine. On the very last page was a note. "This is everything I saw when I couldn't find the words." I didn't disappear. I dove deeper. No explanation. No promise of when or if she'd return. Just that, and it was enough, almost. Time moved. It always does. 1 year became 2. I stopped counting after a while. I met people. Not Mira replacements, not rebounds. Real, whole people with lives and stories of their own. I dated someone for a few months. Ava, a journalist with eyes like glass and a laugh that filled rooms. She taught me how to cook, how to tell stories that weren't just about heartbreak. I told her about Mira. Not all at once, but eventually. She listened. Asked only one question. Would you go back if she walked through that door right now? I didn't lie. I don't know, I said. And that was the beginning of the end. After Ava left, I didn't spiral. I didn't retreat. I just kept going. Kept building a life that wasn't about waiting. My apartment became more than just the place she used to visit. It became mine. The walls were new art. The shelves held new memories. But the violet she once pressed into her journal, now framed in glass, stayed on the nightstand. A quiet reminder of promises made not in words, but in presence. And then, just when I had settled into a version of peace I believed might last forever, the unexpected happened. I was at the community center, helping Ezra prep for his final portfolio review. He was older now, more confident, with a distinct style that merged chaos and grace. "Your friend," he said casually as he adjusted a canvas. "She's here." I froze. "Oh, what do you mean?" "She's in the gallery across the street. Opening night. Someone said she just got back from Spain." I didn't think. I didn't pack up. I didn't even take off my paint-stained apron. I ran. The gallery was packed, buzzing with quiet excitement. I pushed through the crowd until I found the back room, and there she was. "Mira?" standing beside a series of massive canvases, her hair longer now, her posture softer but somehow stronger. She looked older, not in age, but in story, like someone who had lived 5 lives since the last time I saw her. She didn't see me at first. She was talking to a couple, gesturing at one of her pieces. But then her eyes drifted, maybe pulled by instinct, maybe something more, and landed on mine. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then she smiled, not wide, not dramatic, just a small, real smile that held 1,000 echoes. I didn't walk over. Not yet. I let her finish her conversation. I watched her live in her moment. When she finally turned back to me, I took one step, then another until we stood inches apart. She looked up, eyes searching mine. "You came," she said softly. "You called," I replied, and we both laughed. The sound was strange and familiar all at once. She reached into her coat and handed me a folded piece of paper. "It's not a letter," she said. "It's a map of what I've seen, where I've been, what I want to share, if you still want to see it with me." I opened it later, alone, after the crowd dispersed. It wasn't a map of places. It was of moments, drawings, dates, notes. A record of where she had healed, stumbled, begun again. And at the very bottom, in tiny ink, "I'm not asking you to wait anymore. I'm asking if you'll walk beside me, now." I closed my eyes, exhaled, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was chasing a ghost. I felt like I was standing at the beginning of something entirely new. Not the continuation of a story, but the start of one neither of us had written yet. One where we would learn, together, how to love without vanishing. How to stay without hiding. How to begin again. Not from where we left off, but from where we finally met. We didn't begin again in the way movies like to pretend people do. There was no montage of perfectly timed reunions, no sudden dissolving of wounds into smiles. Instead, we began again like people who knew the weight of beginning. Cautious, careful, but willing. We met in the small spaces between our past and our potential, and somewhere in that middle, we started building something that didn't look like before. That was the point. We weren't trying to reclaim what we had lost. We were here to make something we had never dared to imagine. Mira moved back into the city. Not far from me, but not with me. "Let's not rush toward closeness," she said, one hand on my chest. "Let's earn it." We relearned each other slowly, like musicians who had once played the same song, but were now discovering a new rhythm. We went on walks, not to talk about the past, but to simply be in each other's presence. Sometimes we'd sit on a park bench for hours saying nothing, just watching the world move. Other days, we'd fill the hours with stories. Her time in Spain, my students at the center, the funny, small moments we used to overlook. She brought me one of her new paintings as a gift. It was different from her usual work. Softer, more color than shadow. In the center were 2 figures walking across a bridge, hands not touching but reaching. Below it, a single line written in her signature scrawl. "But Deborah never burned the bridge. We just forgot the way back." I hung it in my living room. Sometimes I'd catch her glancing at it, as if she still doubted she had painted something so full of light. There were hard days too. Days when the echo of old pain crept back in, uninvited. Nights where she still flinched in her sleep, and I'd wake to find her sitting on the edge of the bed, breathing like she was drowning in air. I never tried to fix her. I learned not to. Instead, I sat beside her, offering only silence and warmth until the storm inside her passed. And when my own fears rose, when I felt her pull away, even for a second, I reminded myself that closeness wasn't the same as possession, that she wasn't mine to lose. She was only ever hers to give. The letters didn't stop. Even with her just blocks away, Mira continued to write. She left notes in my coat pocket, beneath my pillow, once inside the cover of a book I hadn't opened in years. They were never dramatic, just fragments, observations, poetry in shorthand. "Who furrow your brow when you sleep? The cat only follows you when you whistle off key. This morning's sky was the same blue as your old scarf." I began writing back. slipping folded paper into her sketchbooks, hiding words inside her cereal boxes. Our dialogue lived between spoken and unspoken, between ink and glance. And then came spring. It arrived like forgiveness. Quiet, gradual, undeniable. The city shook off its gray, and the cherry blossoms returned to the park we had once wandered through in silence. We walked there again, this time hand in hand, not afraid of being seen. "You know," she said, eyes scanning the petals, "I used to believe love was a season. Temporary, beautiful but never meant to last." I looked at her. "And now?" She smiled. "Now I think it's a garden. You have to keep planting it." We didn't move in together. Not immediately. Not because we didn't want to, but because we understood that love needed space to breathe. Still, we spent most nights together. Dinner at my place, tea at hers, falling asleep in the middle of conversations about things as small as pasta or as large as regret. She began hosting small art classes at the community center. My students adored her. Ezra called her the calm chaos, which she said was the best compliment she'd ever received. One night, as we sat on my balcony watching the city glow, she handed me a small envelope. "Open it," she said, "but not until tomorrow." I promised I wouldn't, but of course I didn't wait. Inside was a single Polaroid, us standing beneath the bridge from her painting. We hadn't taken it. Someone must have captured us without us knowing. On the back, her handwriting. "We found our way back, but only because we stopped looking for what we lost, but that night, I dreamt of the first time I saw her. The umbrella, the rain, the silence. Except this time, in the dream, she turned to me and said, 'I knew I'd owe you more than goodbye one day.' And when I woke, she was lying beside me, her hand resting over my heart like it belonged there." Time passed, as it always does, and slowly, the past became less of a weight and more of a thread. One that connected us, but didn't confine us. We began talking about a future, not in the way we once did, filled with fantasy and rushed promises, but with calm, grounded certainty. A studio space for her, a second room for me to write, a life not mapped in big milestones but in quiet, consistent acts of presence. The day she asked me to come with her to Barcelona again wasn't dramatic. She said it over breakfast, in between bites of toast. "They've invited me to teach, just for the summer." She looked up. "Come with me. Not because you need to, but because I want to show you the places I found myself." I smiled. "Only if you'll let me get lost in them too." She laughed. "Deal." Bob? That summer changed everything. Not in the way that altered who we were, but in the way that deepened it. We woke to the sound of birds that didn't sing in our city. We walked unfamiliar streets and made them ours. We painted together, me clumsily, her brilliantly. She showed me the bookstore with the crooked door, the bakery that did, in fact, smell like the mornings we never had. One afternoon, on a rooftop overlooking the city, she turned to me and said, "I used to think I didn't know how to stay, but I just didn't know where to land." I pulled her close. "Then let's keep landing together." And that's what we did, not perfectly, not without stumbles, but together. Eventually, we returned home, built that garden. She opened her own gallery. I published a book, part memoir, part fiction, entirely shaped by us. In the final chapter, I wrote, "Some loves don't break. They bend, they fracture, they hide. But if they're true, they wait. Not in silence, but in the spaces we leave open. And when we're ready, they meet us there, not to rescue us, but to walk beside us, finally at the same pace. We never married, never needed to. Our commitment lived in everything else. The breakfasts, the shared routines, the arguments, the reconciliations, the planting. Years later, while cleaning the back of a closet, I found her very first letter. The sketch of the city, the 5 words. "I saw us in everything." I smiled. Because now I saw us too. Not just in the echoes of what we'd been, but in the life we had created from the ashes of almost. Mira walked in just as I was closing the box. "What are you smiling at?" she asked, wiping her hands on a towel. I said, "Yous." She stepped close, eyes curious. "You thinking about writing another book?" I nodded. Maybe. Fiction or nonfiction? She teased. I thought for a moment, then kissed her forehead. Buth. Because some truths sound made up, and some fictions feel like the only truth I've ever known. Bashi grinned. Then let's keep making the unbelievable believable. And we did, until the end, and beyond. Enjoyed the video? Give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell so you never miss an update.